everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. So we're talking about a different case today. I did ask people. I did a 4-minute video over on Michelle Walks about the two missing sisters in Aberdeen in Scotland. And right at the beginning of that video, I said, I actually did that video during verdict watch of this trial. And I asked viewers whether you'd like me to talk about it. And a few people said that, yes, they would like me to talk about it. So I'm here. I'm here to talk about it. So the lady on your screen is Tracey Nix. She's 67 years of age now. But when this really tragic incident happened, she was 65 years old. So I'm going to talk about Tracey's trial. And I'm going to give you my opinion on it. We're going to play some clips, look at some articles, and let me know what you think. It's a tragic case. Look, to be honest, there's no winners in this case. No one can win in this case. But I'm going to start at the very beginning for those who don't know anything about this case. Actually, we're not going to start at the very beginning. We're going to start at the beginning of the trial, because I came into this case, it's only a couple of days ago. The trial actually only took 2 days. It was a 2-day trial. And I didn't know anything about it. So it's a couple of days ago, and I was looking for something different to watch on YouTube, right? I was sick of the Sebastian stuff. There was nothing important in Delphi that had come out, and I just was looking for something different. And I saw on Law and Crime Network a trial that had just started. So I started watching it, and I rewound it right back to the beginning, and I listened to the whole trial. But because I knew nothing about this case and never heard of it before, I watched that trial as a juror. I think probably it's the best way to watch a trial, right? As a juror, knowing absolutely nothing. So the only information I had was what was presented to me by the prosecutor. And then I was very much hoping that the defense was going to put on some kind of a case, because I had questions, and I still got questions. So if you've been watching this and you know about this case, maybe you know more than me, because I feel that there's a backstory in the pre-trial hearings that I don't know about. Like I said, I came into this case knowing absolutely nothing. But we're going to start at the very beginning. So let's say a couple of hellos first, though. Let's give people a chance to get in here. Hello, Paper Chaser, Linda, Jackie, Oh Snap Ginger, CW, Terry, the Fat Lady Channel, Babe, Jill, Sue, Aberinian, I don't know how to say your name, I'm really sorry. We've also got Belinda, we've got Susan, we've got Esmeralda. Who else have we got? Mary Jane from Ontario, Canada. Natalie. Who else have we got? Didn't see the whole trial. Yeah, this is the thing. This is the thing that I'm getting to, because the defense had a bunch of information, but the jury didn't hear it. But we'll get there. Like I said, there must be some kind of pre-trial hearing backstory that I'm not aware of. There's a reason why the defense weren't allowed to present a case to the jury. There's got to be a reason for that. It will be in the pre-trial hearings and the pre-trial motions. But I don't know about that. I'm gonna go back and have a look. I'm gonna have to, because my curiosity is such that I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the pre-trial hearings and find out why why this happened. Why on earth this happened? Why did this trial run in the way that it did? And there's even an argument as to why this trial even happened at all. But again, we'll get there. I'm preempting myself. Hello, L, Rambling Rome. Who else have we got? Neely, Holly. You watched the parents' press conference. Yeah, I'm going to play that. It's only very short. I'm going to play that later. Hi, Mike. Okay. If you have a moment, psychologically speaking, about the moon phase and the correlation to autistic traits in people. Okay, I'll take a look. That's a interesting concept. We got Ginger Snap Judy. We got, that's it. Tessa. We got right down to the bottom of the chart. Maybe they made a deal because they wanted the previous death kept out. Maybe. All right. Okay. So the lady on your screen is Tracey Nix. She was on trial for manslaughter, aggravated manslaughter. This is a case out of Florida. So, as you might know, Florida or the Sunshine State, everything is out in the open. So there's never a question as to whether, you know, you're going to see the trial or not, because Florida seemed to just stream all the trials. Oh yeah. That leads me to a sidebar, a little sidebar. Side note, completely unrelated, but kind of related in the, you know, the Florida thing. Stefan Stearns is due to stand trial in about 40 days, something like that, for the essay of Madeleine Soto. So that's going to be really interesting. That's going to be very interesting. And as it's Florida, I'm assuming it is going to be televised. I don't know, but as it's Florida, so going to keep an eye on that one. All right, so Tracey Nix, 65 years old in 2022. What happened? She stood trial for aggravated manslaughter and leaving a child unattended in a vehicle for more than 15 minutes. So that's clearly a law in Florida. And this little pumpkin here is Tracey's granddaughter, Uriel, her name is, Uriel Shock, 7 months old. And on the 1st of November, 2022, little Uriel, they called her Yuri, she was 7 months old and she was being looked after by her grandma, Tracey. So Tracey and her husband, Nate, they did look after their grandkids quite often. Tracey and Nate had 2 daughters, both with children. So they were hands-on grandparents. They looked after their kids a lot, as and when needed. So this particular day, the 1st of November, 2022, Uriel's mother and Tracey and Nate's daughter, Kayla, Kayla rang Tracey at some time in the morning saying, could she look after Uriel that afternoon? Tracey was busy that day. Thank you, Ipsy, for the £10. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Tracey was busy that day. She had a prayer meeting with a few of her lady friends in the morning. And then she was going out for lunch with the same lady friends. So they did like prayer meetings at like different people's houses. But this particular day, they decided that they were going to go out for lunch. So anyway, Kayla rang Tracey and said, could she look after Uriel for that afternoon, because Kayla had a hair appointment and, you know, she wanted a little bit of me time, and there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Kayla wanted a little bit of me time. She wanted to go and get her hair done. And she rang her mother and said, could she take care of Uriel that afternoon? So Tracey said yes. So Tracey went to pick Uriel up, and because she was going out for lunch, she decided not to change her plans, and she picked Uriel up and took Uriel to the lunch with the lady friends. Now, they were playing videos in the court, and unfortunately, we, the public, didn't see the videos, but apparently there was a video from the restaurant of the ladies, Tracey and little Uriel, and Uriel was like the center of attention because, you know, she's 7 months old. She's a little cute little girl. I mean, absolutely adorable little girl. So she was the center of attention. There's absolutely no question, you know, that Uriel was, you know, she was in seemingly safe hands with these ladies. That, you know, Tracey had all the necessary things to look after her. She, you know, got her car seat and her diaper bag and everything she needed. So there was no question of Uriel being neglected at that point. And, you know, Tracey was appropriate with the way that she was dealing with Uriel. There was no question. And the 3 ladies that went for lunch with her all got up on the stand and told their story about what happened that day. Okay, cool, good stuff. Now, one of the ladies had to go somewhere for about 1:50. So there was like a timeline that developed naturally from that. So they ate their lunch and they left this restaurant shortly before 1:50, something like 1:40 maybe, so that this other lady could go and do whatever she needed to do. So Tracey and Uriel left the restaurant maybe about 1:40 and drove the 3 to 4 miles home. So not very far to go home. And Tracey got home. You know, Uriel was strapped into her car seat, and Tracey parked the car under a tree in the yard and went inside. Unfortunately, she left Uriel in the car, and it was a boiling hot day. Now, for me, November, you know, I was thinking, well, how hot can it possibly be in November? Because I'm thinking about what it's like in November here. You know, usually here in November, yeah, you do have some warm days, but there's no question of it being hot. It's usually raining. But then I thought, oh, it's Florida. It's Florida. So this car got hot. Tracey completely forgot about Uriel for probably about 3 hours. And it suddenly dawned on her, like she'd gone inside, she'd played the piano, she'd done things with her dog, like played with her dog. So she was just having this kind of relaxing afternoon. She'd completely forgotten that Uriel was in the back seat. Uriel had obviously fallen asleep during the little drive home, and Tracey had just completely forgotten her. Totally forgotten her. So by the time that she realised, Uriel sadly had passed away. And the medical examiner said she passed away of hyperthermia. So we all know what hypothermia is. You know, when you get so cold and your body just can't stand it and you die. Well, there's hyperthermia, which is heat stroke, overheating. So when Uriel was found, Nate tried to do CPR. They were doing CPR when Tracey and Nate's other daughter, Rebecca, arrived with another grandson who was, I think they were going out for something to do with that grandson. And it was just like just a dreadful, dreadful, dreadful scene. By the time the paramedics arrived, Uriel was already in rigor mortis. So she'd been deceased. It wasn't like she could be saved. You know, by the time Tracey and Nate found her, there was no way she could be saved. You know, CPR was just irrelevant because she'd already started to go into rigor mortis, like her jaw, like it's the small muscles first. So when you die, your muscles stiffen up for a period of time, for like 24 hours. And her jaw had already locked. Her hands had already clenched. You know, she died with clenched fists, and she was already into rigor mortis. So she'd probably been dead maybe a couple of hours by the time that Tracey and Nate found her. Absolutely tragic situation. So when the cops arrived, we heard from the detective that interviewed Tracey, and she was just inconsolable, absolutely inconsolable. She didn't try to hide it. She was very open. She was like, I just forgot it. I just forgot. And the detective allowed Tracey's friend to go into one of the interview rooms with her. So I think they did this purposefully, that they left Tracey and this friend, Cassie, in this interview room. There was a camera, it was being recorded. They weren't explicitly told that they were being recorded, which is interesting. It's interesting because Tracey wasn't under arrest at that point. But she'd agreed to go to the sheriff's office, you know, voluntarily. She actually didn't want to stay at home. She didn't want to stay at home. Had she been drinking? No. Had she got dementia? We're getting there. We're getting there, Broken Goth Doll. So she didn't want to stay at home. She didn't want to face Kayla, like the baby's mother. So the detective said, well, you know, I do need to question you. Come to the sheriff's office with me. So Tracey went with the detective. They, you know, like I said, they let this friend into the interview room and just left them and let her talk. And I'm quite sure that was purposeful. And Tracey was just absolutely inconsolable. Like you can't put into words the sound. Now, we didn't see the video. They didn't show the video, but we heard the audio. And she was just really open. I just forgot her. There was no question. She didn't try to lie. She didn't try to make up an excuse. She just was in shock. However, what was not brought up at trial was a little boy called Ezra. Ezra was Uriel's older brother. Ezra also died under the care of Tracey Nix just a few months previous. So Uriel's death happened the 1st of November 2022. Just 11 months earlier, in December of 2021, Ezra died while Tracey was looking after him. Now, this wasn't brought up at trial, so I can understand why this wasn't brought up at trial, because it's prejudicial. You know, the charges were relating to Uriel's death. So bringing up the case of another child or anybody, you know, bringing up a different case is prejudicial. So I can understand why that was kept out of this trial. Ezra's death was deemed an accident. So what happened there? Little Ezra, I think he was 16 months old or 18 months old. Kayla was 6 months pregnant with Uriel when this happened. And Tracey and Nate were looking after Ezra. Nate went to Walmart, went to do some shopping. So Tracey and Ezra were at their home, well, at Tracey's home, and Tracey fell asleep. She fell asleep. Ezra managed to get out of the yard. He went under a fence into a neighbour's yard and drowned in a pond. He drowned in a pond on the neighbour's property. So how this little boy had managed to climb under a fence, like what he was thinking, I've no idea. Whether he was, I don't know, chasing a cat, I don't know what he was doing. What got into little Ezra's head, we'll never know, will we? But he got out of the yard, got onto neighbour's property and drowned. So absolutely heartbreaking that little Ezra died, but there was no charges brought. There was no charges brought. And then just 11 months later, 7-month-old Uriel also died in Tracey Nix's care. And in this particular instance, there was very serious consequences. She was charged with aggravated manslaughter. You know, there was no murder here. There was no intent at all. Clearly, she loved Uriel. Clearly, she loved Ezra. It was just a really, really tragic circumstance that Ezra got out of the yard while Tracey was asleep, and an equally tragic circumstance that Uriel died while she was left in a hot car. So you can understand why there are questions here, can't you? You can understand why there are questions here. There's Tracey with it. I don't know whether that's Uriel or Ezra, but she was a very hands-on grandma. So she was absolutely gutted when Ezra died. But it seems that Kayla, now don't get me wrong here. I'm not victim blaming. Kayla, the mother of both Ezra and Uriel, is a victim in all of this. I'm not blaming Kayla or her husband, Drew. I'm not blaming them. However, I've got questions. So if Tracey, right, if, let's say, for example, right, you know, put myself in Kayla's position. Let's say I had a baby and he was being looked after by my mother, and then my mother fell asleep, and then my baby died because grandma fell asleep. Would I want to leave my new baby, my next baby, in that same person's care? I don't think I would, you know. I don't think I would. However, there's a lot of howevers in this case. However, maybe everybody, Kayla, Drew, the other daughter, Rebecca, who also has kids, being looked after by Tracey and Nate, maybe they thought, well, that was just a freak accident, absolutely tragic, it's never going to happen again. Maybe they thought that, well, if Tracey has help, because Nate was there, you know, when, you know, they sometimes would have Uriel 4 or 5 days a week. You know, they were hands-on grandparents. They were, you know, their daughters relied on them for childcare. So, and they were two responsible people. They weren't drinking. They weren't on drugs. Actually, in her working life, Tracey had been a principal, a school principal. So from Kayla's point of view, Drew's point of view, Rebecca's point of view, you kind of think, well, maybe they all thought this was such a tragic accident that Ezra got out of the yard, got under a fence, went walkabout, and sadly drowned. And it was a tragic freak accident that could never happen again. And then 11 months down the line, we have Uriel, who is left in a car and dies because Tracey forgot. So that's where we are. That's the backstory to all of this. That's the backstory to all of this. Okay, so I'm going to go through a couple of articles here. That's Ezra that I've already talked about. So we've already gone through that. So we don't need to go through that. All right. Let's go to the trial here. Let's go to the trial. Because the defense, so the prosecution rested their case after a day. So they had the three ladies on who went to lunch with Tracey and Uriel. They had Rebecca, Kayla, as mother auntie of Uriel, to, you know, just to give their sides of the story, what they experienced. The detective, the medical examiner. There wasn't. Oh, the paramedics, couple of paramedics. And that was it. The prosecution rested their case. I think the prosecution thought that it was an open and shut case because by the letter of the law, count 2, they had to find her guilty of count 2, honestly, because she did leave Uriel in the car unattended for longer than 15 minutes. So this is what William Fletcher, who was the defense attorney, said after. And this is to ABC News. We spoke to Tracey's attorney, William Fletcher, about the jury's decision. So the jury's decision, what was the jury's decision? Well, the jury's decision was that, yes, they found her guilty of leaving Uriel in the car unattended for longer than 15 minutes. We know she was there for longer than 15 minutes because she was already in rigor mortis by the time she was found. So if Tracey had tried to say, well, I only left her for 10 minutes, well, how do you die and enter rigor mortis in 10 minutes? But Tracey never lied. She never tried to, make excuses at all. There was nothing like that. The timeline from leaving the restaurant to getting home, you know, they knew what time she left the restaurant. They knew what time she got home. And Tracey said, I just forgot her. So the timeline was very, very clear. There was nobody trying to, you know, make things up or change things around. So she had to be found guilty of count 2. The jury had no choice. So the issue was the aggravated manslaughter. And the jury found her not guilty. Not guilty of aggravated manslaughter. So William Fletcher, the defense attorney, said of the jury, they did their job. They did not convict her of the aggravated manslaughter or the lesser included charge of manslaughter, which was a win. But they had no choice on count 2. I don't know how sophisticated you are with the counts. This is him talking to a reporter. But I never argued against count 2 because I had nothing to argue. But they do plan to appeal, interestingly. So she could face up to 6 years in prison for that count 2, leaving a child unattended in a car for longer than 15 minutes. I think it's a child under 6. I think that was the specificity of the law. But the sentencing is on is April the 3rd, and the defence do intend to file a motion to the judge to get her a reduced sentence. So rather than giving her the maximum of 6 years, to reduce that sentence due to mitigating factors. So what are the mitigating factors? Well, as I was watching this trial, right, throughout the prosecution's case, blink and you'll miss it, because the prosecution's case was very, very short. I was thinking, well, you know, 65 years old, is she in the early stages of dementia? You know, the fact, now the jury didn't know this, so I did know one thing that the jury didn't know. I did know about Ezra, the little baby who died due to drowning 11 months previous. I did know about that, right? Because I looked it up. Now the jury didn't have that to rely on. But nothing, I didn't know anything else. I genuinely didn't know anything else about the case. So I was thinking, well, is she in the early stages of dementia? Was she on medication for, I don't know, a medical condition? You know, as you get older, you know, as your age increases, your need for medication tends to increase. So is she on a bunch of medication that makes her fall asleep or makes her forgetful? What's going on here? So I was hoping that the defense was going to put on a medic or, you know, Tracey's doctor, somebody, anybody. So I was hoping that was going to hear that in the defense's case. Now, let's be very clear. Only the prosecution have the burden of proof. The defense, any defense, anywhere where there's jury trials, does not need to put on one witness. The defense can just sit there and do nothing. It's all the prosecution's burden to prove the charges brought forward. The defense doesn't have to prove anything. The defense doesn't have to prove anything. But I was hoping to get more information about Tracey and why this loving grandmother, who was a retired school principal, had allowed her granddaughter to die in a hot car. There had to be an explanation for it. So when the defense rested their case after one witness, I was very disappointed. And the only witness they put on was Nate, Tracey's husband, grandfather of Uriel. And it was literally to say that when you're in the vehicle that they use, it was a Lexus, if the baby car seat was behind the driver's seat and you get out, you can't see. So you can't see the baby's car seat from the driver's seat. And even if you look in your mirror, you know, you're not going to see. There's an issue with what you can see from the driver's seat. You can't see the car seat from the driver's seat. That was literally all Nate was asked. So I was disappointed. But then, during the lunch break, during verdict watch, the defense were allowed to put witnesses on. So this is out of the eyes and ears of the jury. Like you can see here, this is Law and Crime Network. They've got the verdict clock on right here. And the defense put on 3 witnesses that I thought were incredibly interesting. So, again, as I said at the beginning, there must be a backstory here as to why the defense weren't allowed to put these witnesses on in, you know, to the jury. Yeah, it was making a record, yes. So it's called a proffer. That if evidence is excluded from a trial for whatever reason, that attorney, so it could be prosecution or defense, can, but it's usually defense. Like the times I've heard of this happening, it's the defense that does this. It's basically putting their witnesses on to be heard by the judge and the court reporter for the record. So it wasn't allowed at trial. It wasn't admissible evidence at the trial for whatever reason. And again, I don't know what that reason is. And I'm going to go and investigate because my curiosity is piqued very much so by this. Because these were really interesting witnesses about Tracey. So we're going to play some clips here from the trial. Again, this is not in the presence of the jury. This is as a proffer, just for the record, right? That the judge has allowed them to put these witnesses on just for the record. So we're 1 hour and 37 minutes into verdict watch here. So there's no question whatsoever that this was in front of the jury. It absolutely was not. This was a proffer made during the lunch break. And we heard from 3 witnesses. What was absolutely, I thought this was bad. I thought this was bad. But partway through the 3rd witness, the verdict came back. And they stopped the witness. They stopped the witness mid-sentence. And I was hoping that they were going to keep the cameras rolling and have the witness come back after the verdict was read to give the rest of his testimony. But unfortunately, the court cameras were turned off right after the verdict. So whether that witness came back and gave the rest of his testimony, I don't know. I don't know. All right, so we're going to hear from 3 witnesses. Well, I guess you would say 2.5 witnesses. So we're going to play some clips here. Now, I'm not going to play the entire testimony, but the link to this is in the description box. And if your curiosity has been piqued by this live stream, please go and watch the full testimony of these 2.5 witnesses. So we're starting at 4 hours and 32 minutes into the day. So for those who, are going to go back and just listen to this testimony. And I guess a lot of people who were following the trial didn't hear this because it was in verdict watch. Some people, when verdict watch starts, they tune out and they just keep their eye on the case, but go away and do something else because you think, oh, well, we're in verdict watch now. There's nothing interesting going to happen. But this was the most interesting part of day 2. So we're going to start from 4 hours and 32 minutes. I've got it sped up a little. Got it on 1.25. I'll put the CCs on. The audio wasn't great, unfortunately. But it is what it is. Okay.
Okay, have you ever been, seen me being qualified in?
Unexpected, so when I walked in, they were here and I just turned it away. No problem. All right, just make sure we don't have that anymore. Okay. And now we're here, so we're off the official record. However, now Mr. Fletcher is going to do his proffer. So Mr. Fletcher, the courtroom is yours.
Thank you.
I call Dr. Benson. You do record this, but it's not, I'm just here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. You said this way. The state's not going to cross-examine if they're not witnesses in the trial. I just want to make sure that's clear on the record. The record's clear. You and I are both sitting here. I'm doing some other work, and you're doing whatever you're doing. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. State your name, please.
Dr. Daniel E. Buffington, Buffington.
Okay. Have you ever testified in court?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Approximately how many times?
Oh, since the early 90s, probably now in excess of 500.
Okay. And what's your specialty?
Clinical pharmacology and toxicology.
Okay. Have you ever been, I assume you've been qualified in court in those fields of expertise more than 500 times?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you give us your education, training, and background?
Yes, sir. I did my undergraduate studies in biology and biochemistry at the University of South Florida, native of the Tampa Bay area. Following that, I did a Doctor of Pharmacy degree, or PharmD, at Mercer University in Atlanta. After that, did postgraduate specialization at Emory University in residency and fellowship in clinical pharmacology and tox. And then after that, also completed an MBA with a healthcare focus
Okay.
from Mercer.
And have you reviewed the case records and interviewed Tracey Nix
Yes, sir, I did.
in this case? Okay. Do you have any particular methods that you'd like to tell us about as far as what you did and what you used?
Yes, sir. So similar to a clinical evaluation with a patient in any inpatient or outpatient setting, my goal was to go through a variety of records that would be beneficial to understand her history, medical, medication, family and social history, laboratory results and data, any prior hospital and clinic records that would help to identify and support an understanding of what medications she was on, pharmacy records, helping to confirm exactly what substances in terms of medication she was taking around this time.
So when I heard this, I was like, this is exactly what, as a juror, I would have wanted to hear. These were the questions that I had. What was her medical status? What was her medication use? So this guy, very experienced person giving evidence at trials, very well educated. I was all ears about this.
Okay. And can you tell us what all you reviewed?
So I reviewed hospital and clinic records. I reviewed law enforcement records from this particular case. It also included a clinical interview with Ms. Nix as well, to have a better understanding of what was happening in her life and any symptoms that may have been consistent with the adverse side effects of the medications that she was being prescribed.
Okay. Anything else that you reviewed in this case?
Yes. So in addition to my training and understanding, it's imperative to stay current in the medical literature. So I did look at medical literature surrounding these particular medications. That can come from a variety of clinical trial data. It can come from FDA approved materials that a manufacturer is required to organize and make public to healthcare practitioners to understand the therapeutic benefits, but also the adverse side effect profiles and risks for medications. There's a variety of other databases that we use in clinical practice. We call them pharmacovigilance, and that is where we, not only when a product gets approved by the FDA, does the manufacturer have to disclose for a specialty panel to understand, to approve that product for use in the United States. That type of tracking goes on for years. So we have MedWatch, we have the FARS database, we have multiple established database systems that healthcare practitioners contribute to even after a product is approved and in the market. And in many cases, we find more out after a product is out in use in large number of patients than we did even at the time a product was approved. So there's also a series of drug interaction databases where if I'm sitting down in a clinic or if I'm doing a forensic review, I can put the patient's medication profile into that data set and then identify if there are in fact drug-drug interactions, meaning one drug competes with another, one drug causes a complication in another. And to a great extent, what we know now is all of us in this room may metabolize the same drug differently. That could be that you don't get as much effect versus the other person. It could be that you get a dramatically higher effect than the other person. So I went through each of those tools that I use in my own clinical practice setting to review this case.
Okay. Anything else other than what you indicated that you reviewed?
I think that's comprehensive. Yes, sir.
Comprehensive.
Yes.
Okay. And did you review case-related depositions?
Yes, sir.
And you already indicated police reports
Yes, sir.
and some transcripts
Correct.
and text messages
Yes, sir.
and photographs?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you render a specialty opinion within your education, training, and experience as to the origin and cause of any issues that Tracey Nix may have had with regard to any altered cognitive status at the time of this event on November 1st, 2022?
Yes, sir, I did.
And could you tell us, please, what your findings were?
Yes, sir. The findings are that the collective list of medications that I confirmed by medical and pharmacy records gave me a clear indication of what she was being prescribed simultaneously during that time.
Okay.
The symptoms that she was experiencing, as based on the interview and based on her statements, are consistent with the adverse side effects with regards to cognitive status, confusion, attention deficits that come with those medications. And,
Okay.
and in fact, there were multiple combined reasons for concern or interactions between the medications she was prescribed.
Okay. Did you identify any significant variables in her past medical history that factored into your findings?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell us about that?
So specifically when looking at her case is in patients 60 and 65 and older, we use significant caution when introducing or prescribing certain medications. In fact, we even maintain a national list or registry of those products called the Beers list. That's named after Dr. Beers. And in that, she was on multiple medications that would be of high concern or risk factor for these types of side effects that are recognized in the Beers list, as well as in the FDA-approved packaged materials and the other patient safety databases as well.
And well, these were actually the medications you're talking about were all prescribed to her?
That is correct.
And you know who did the prescribing?
I have it in my notes, but I didn't take the practitioner's
Okay.
name to memory.
Okay. Did you identify any significant variables in her past social, family, and work history that factored into your findings?
Yes, sir.
And could you tell us about that?
So in addition to her age and history of insomnia and depression, fibromyalgia and sleep apnea, things that she was being treated for, I also identified that she had a family member, a brother, a sibling, who was also experiencing, going through symptoms of early onset dementia, which would have been concerned. She expressed concern that she may attribute some of what she was feeling or experiencing with confusion or mental clouding as being something familial that was happening. There was also work-related examples. She was previously in a leadership position in a school, had transitioned from that based on age and duration of work time, was working for another school. In that situation during this time, she expressed that she, as well as her supervisor, were noticing difficulty for her to identify and retain attention and completion of tasks, again, consistent with the types of symptoms that these medications, when used, can cause.
All right, so let's unpack that a little bit, shall we? So she was in a leadership position. She was a school principal, and but she was actually let go of that second position that he mentioned because she was making a lot of mistakes. She had memory problems. She had memory problems, and she had a family member, a sibling, with early onset dementia. No, look, there's various kinds of dementia. Everybody, I think, probably has heard of Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's does have a familial link. If you have a family member with Alzheimer's, you are statistically more likely to get Alzheimer's yourself. Somebody in their 60s, though, being diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it's considered early onset for Alzheimer's if you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's in your 60s. However, there's various other kinds of dementia also that have potential familial links. Now, my dad had dementia. He's dead now, been dead a long time. He had Parkinson's disease, but he also had Lewy body dementia. Now, Lewy body dementia is, yes, you basically lose your memory. He became, over a period of, I'd say, 5 years, 6 years, he became a shell. He was just a shell. He knew nothing. He knew nothing. But for, I would probably say, maybe 3 or 4 years before he even got diagnosed, he was having memory problems. He was having I'd say in his 60s, he was having problems. And honestly, I wouldn't have left a baby in his care. Even before he was diagnosed, I would not have left a baby in his care because he was just so utterly forgetful. And he actually went, I think it was my mother who told it he had to go to the doctors. And the doctor said, like the first time he was seen by someone, they gave him a memory test and he was fine. They said, oh, you're fine. You're just a bit forgetful. But no. As it progressed, it was really bad. It was really bad. Really bad. And his brother, Harry, has also been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. It's a familial thing. And it is different to Alzheimer's. You lose your memory in kind of a different way. The symptoms are somewhat different, at least at the beginning. Okay. So even though Tracey, as I understand it, did not have a diagnosis of dementia, I could see that there was definitely some warning signs there. The fact that she was let go of a job, the fact that she has a family member, close family member, who has been diagnosed with early onset dementia, that leads me to believe that there's a genetic issue with that person as to why they've been diagnosed with early onset dementia. And she was also on a bunch of medications for various ailments. So she had fibromyalgia, which is a pain condition, like a chronic pain condition, depression, anxiety. And she was being given these medications, multiple medications. Did he have hallucinations? My dad, yes, he did. He did. He did. Now, one of the medications was lorazepam. Lorazepam is a tranquilizer. Lorazepam is addictive. Lorazepam makes you like a zombie. Let's carry on.
Did you identify any significant variables in her past sleep-related disorder history that factored into your findings?
Oh, yeah, there's also sleep apnea as well. She had sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is where you lose, you stop breathing. Like you're asleep and you stop breathing. And sometimes that kind of stopping breathing disrupts your sleep cycle. So you either like wake when you stop breathing, you wake up and then you start breathing again, or you're still asleep, but it disrupts your sleep cycle until you start breathing again. So people with sleep apnea often experienced daytime drowsiness because they're not getting proper sleep. They think they are, but they're not. They're not getting proper sleep. Okay.
Yes, sir. Combination of insomnia and sleep apnea, both are disruptive disorders to getting what we call restorative sleep. That impacts someone during your sleep. In fact, some of the medications she's on actually are prescribed or used to help with sleep, but they can cause what we call complex sleep-related disorders or behaviors. And that's where the risk is in a percentage of patients, you're giving it to help them sleep, but it may actually cause abnormal behaviors, thought processes, or disrupted sleep. And that can be something that occurs during the night or during a period that the individual is sleeping, whether it's night or day. Or it can also be what we refer to as next day cognitive decline or next day drowsiness, where the individual isn't as sharp. And it's not just that they aren't trying to get enough sleep. It's not just that they aren't taking care of themselves. It's something that these particular medications induce on a person and actually worsen the quality of sleep and cause mental clouding and confusion the next day, even after they've been up.
And what drugs are we talking about?
So those in particular.
All right, so he's going to talk about the drugs now. I've seen some people in chat saying what medications was on. So what medications was she on? So he's going to talk about that in a minute. So I'm going to go back to saying I'm not victim blaming the parents of Uriel here. I'm not. But surely the family knew there was a problem here. Surely they knew. Because she was let go of a job because of memory problems. She had a bunch of medical conditions. Now, it's possible that Tracey kept the medical conditions to herself. Maybe it's possible that the family didn't know how many medications she was taking. That's very possible. But 11 months previous, baby Ezra had died in her care after she fell asleep. When Grandpa, Nate, was at Walmart, Grandma Tracey fell asleep. Ezra got out of the yard and drowned in the neighbour's pond. So put those things together and you think, as a mother or as a father, would I want my baby to be looked after by a woman who has already been responsible for the death of one child due to falling asleep, not due to anything malicious, but due to falling asleep, and the baby gets away and dies. And then she's let go of this job. Now, I don't know exactly when she was let go of this job. And she's got a bunch of medical issues. Would I want my baby to be looked after by that person? No. So I'm going to be harsh here and say, even though I'm not victim blaming, this is going to sound like I'm victim blaming, but I'm not. I'm saying this with as much respect as I can muster. That perhaps the two daughters, Kayla and Rebecca, were using the grandparents as childcare. They were very hands-on. And maybe Grandma Tracey, because she was such a hands-on grandma, didn't want to say no. She didn't want to say no because, she thought she was okay. And she thought that everybody else thought she was okay. Therefore, she must be okay. And she wants to see her grandchildren. She doesn't want to cause any friction. She doesn't want to say no. And this is where we are. This is where we are. Exactly. Some people find it hard to say no to their children. They do. They do find it hard to say no because they want to help. They love their grandchildren. They love their children. They understand that, a mother of a 7-month-old baby might want to have an afternoon, a hair appointment, just to chill out. Just to chill out. And she might want to do things with the grandchildren, take them out for stuff, go and watch them doing stuff. That's what grandmas do, right? And I think, personally, this is my personal opinion, I think Tracey was put in a position where she didn't want to say no, but yet the family knew that there was a problem and they ignored it. That's what I think happened here. So even though I'm not blaming the parents, I am saying that perhaps they need to consider that they have some responsibility in allowing this to happen. I'm just saying. All right. So here's what medication she was on.
Or Ambien and cyclobenzaprine, and also lorazepam. So there's each of those represent a different class of medications, but each of those carry with them significant concerns and warnings over the ability to produce these types of changes in cognitive status, clarity, attention, and thought process.
Are any of these medications on the Beers list?
Yes, sir. Each of those.
All of them are?
I would have to double check for the cyclo, but I'm pretty sure it is as well. But the benzodiazepines and the zolpidem, that's the generic name for Ambien, is clearly on that list. It's so much on the list that the FDA requires the manufacturers to disclose, makes it a substantial warning, and has even in recent years said it has to be disclosed to patients when they're doing direct-to-consumer advertising. So that means that it's not just something that only a few people should be warned of. It's something that everyone should be warned of.
Let's look at Ambien. As a pharmacologist and a toxicologist, would you recommend that Ambien be given to a patient 65 years of age on a long-term basis?
Absolutely not. It would be for short-term use in an acute emotional scenario where the insomnia has occurred abruptly. It is not going to be safe to use long-term. And in fact, there are alternatives that would make it not even desirable in my practice setting to recommend it to someone 65 and older. In fact, the incidence that I see those types of side effects and problems is high even in patients under 65. It's not a product that I recommend.
Okay. And what about, I'm going to use the trade name, Flexeril?
Yes, Flexeril is a muscle relaxer. So Ambien or Zolpidem was a medication used to help induce and keep you to get a sound, restful sleep when it's doing its job right. Flexeril is something that actually relaxes a person if they're having muscle spasms, if they're having fibromyalgia. That's the times it's reached for as a therapeutic tool. Many patients have to discontinue that product because they have cognitive status changes. They have balance changes. Normally able to traverse, walk safely. Next thing you know, we're identifying they're stumbling, they're falling, they're feeling dizzy, confused. So it's a medication that, again, it's been around a long time, but it's got limited use and should not be used in patients 60 and older.
Lorazepam.
Lorazepam's yet another therapeutic class. It's in the benzodiazepine, so like Valium and Xanax and others. It is a medication that has many uses, but many of them are because of its side effects. So it is a muscle relaxant and something that can sedate someone. So in that case, some prescribers may suggest it for sleep. The problem is it can also cause extended next day drowsiness. So it's not optimal. It's not optimal in an older patient. It's also something that can cause hallucinations, anxiety, even though it's something that can treat anxiety. So it's a medication with many different effects on the human body and the brain, but would not be recommended for someone who's having confusion or attention issues.
All right, so 3. She was on 3 very powerful drugs. All that Ambien that's its job, to induce sleep. But what it does for many people is that, yes, it sends you to sleep, but the next day you are drowsy, at least for some of that day. Flexeril I don't know too much about, but lorazepam, why on earth was she given lorazepam? Why? Well, possibly because she got fibromyalgia, and fibromyalgia is a chronic pain condition. And if the argument is if you give muscle relaxers, then it eases the pain. But 3 drugs together, whoever prescribed those 3 drugs together, I'm sitting here shaking my head at the unnecessary nature of those 3 drugs. Used together in someone who is also having problems with concentration and with memory. Flexeril is a muscle relaxer. So if she's having Flexeril as a muscle relaxer, she's got Ambien for sleep. Why is she having lorazepam? Why? Anyhow, he goes on a little bit more. There is the next witness who is also a toxicology person, like a drugs person. He also said that when Tracey came off these, like he'd seen Tracey since she'd come off all of these drugs. Like, I think during the time between Uriel's death and the trial, she's been in some kind of inpatient facility. Like, she was out on bail. She was in some kind of inpatient facility. She'd come off all of the drugs that she was on, and her memory was much improved. So the drugs that she was being given for these various conditions that she had were just compounding the problems that she was having with sleep, concentration, and memory. and she was much improved. Now, it doesn't mean to say that she's not in the early stages of dementia. She might be. We don't know. No diagnosis as far as I know. She might be in the early stages of dementia, but be almost completely normal without, now these drugs are not on board. Bad. Now, the third witness, who is he? Here he is. I want to play this third witness. He gets cut off partway through, but this guy's a little bit different. This guy is a psychologist, and he has done some work on forgotten baby syndrome, which I didn't know there was even a term called forgotten baby syndrome, but I went and looked it up, and there is. There's only a few. This is Google Scholar, right? There's only a few articles, but it's actually a thing, forgotten baby syndrome. And these are people who forget their babies. So, you know, often it's in cars because, you know, you're busy driving, you know, you've got other things on your mind, you get out of your car and you forget your baby is in the car because they've fallen asleep. So they're completely quiet and you've just forgotten. And it's a thing. It's an absolute thing. So I'm going to play this this psychologist here. And shamefully, they cut him off partway through the testimony because the verdict comes in. So even though the camera cut off, I do hope he was allowed to continue his testimony for the record after the court camera turned off. But let's play this third witness here.
You solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
State your name for the court, please.
David Diamond,
And how are you employed, sir?
at the University of South Florida. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology.
Okay. And how long have you been so employed?
Almost 30 years.
Okay. And could you tell us your education, training, and experience in the field of psychology or what other specialties that you may have?
I received an undergraduate degree in biology from the University of California, Irvine, and a PhD also in biology with a specialty in neurobiology of memory, also from University of California, Irvine at the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. I had a postdoc at the Department of Pharmacology at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, and ever since then I've been a professor in psychology at the University of South Florida.
Okay. All right. And what is your specialty, if any, sir?
My primary specialty is the study of the brain and memory.
Okay.
May I add that I've also been a career scientist at the Veterans Affairs Department for 30 years, with my specialty being post-traumatic stress disorder, which is fundamentally a memory disorder.
Okay. Can you give us a summary of your contributions to science?
So I have primarily studied all different aspects of the brain and memory. I've studied how people are affected by trauma and develop post-traumatic stress disorder. I've studied how the mechanisms of memory are affected in both animals and people. I've published work on memory in animals and clinical studies on people. And so more recently, I've been studying the phenomenon the last couple of decades on how children are forgotten in cars.
And have you ever testified in court regarding memory issues and or children left in car issues?
Yes, I've testified numerous times in different states, in criminal trials, civil trials as well, as a result of children being forgotten in cars.
Okay, can you tell us how many different states you've testified in with regard to that?
As I recall, 5 or 6 different states in which I've testified specifically in criminal trials.
Okay, and also in other countries?
Yes, I've also testified on a case in 2 cases in Australia. One involving a child that was forgotten by a mother in Australia.
Okay. And how long have you been studying about, we'll say, the issue of memory and how it may affect children being left in cars.
So I do remember very well when I began studying this. It was about 20 years ago when I'd already been studying memory for decades. And I received a call from someone, a news reporter, asking me as a memory expert to explain how it is that so many hundreds of children have died as a result of being forgotten in cars. And I will admit at the time, the fact that I understood all about memory, in fact, I studied forgetting. I had no idea what the reporter was referring to. But as a scientist and also as a parent, I was very curious. So I then started doing research on my own. And I found websites, kidsincars.org and noheatstroke.org, where they had been keeping track of children that had been forgotten in cars. And I learned that hundreds, this is 20 years ago, at the time, hundreds of children had died as a result of being left and forgotten in cars. They had died of heat stroke. That's therefore how I began my study, was to appreciate the numbers, which were staggering. I learned that the children that now are being forgotten in cars, it was largely unheard of. It hadn't happened prior to development of airbags. So before there were airbags in cars in the 1990s, children in general were put in the front seat. And so you're not forgetting a child that's immediately next to you. Once children were put in the back seat, in particular facing the rear, when you have infants in the back seat, then you start seeing people forgetting kids in cars. So there's first an obvious pattern that we see, which is children are forgotten in cars beginning in the late 1990s. And what we have now is an epidemic. Last year, 39 children were forgotten and died in hot cars.
How many?
39 children were forgotten that died in hot cars. So we've had hundreds of children.
I apologize, Dr. Diamond. I misheard something.
All right. Well, there's that little pause. This is one of his publications. So, when a child dies of heat stroke after a parent or caregiver unknowingly leaves the child in a car, how does it happen and is it a crime? So this was in 2019, published in Medicine, Science and the Law. That's the journal. Commonly reported, this is just the abstract, the summary. I'm not going to read the full article here. It's commonly reported that in the course of a drive, a parent or caregiver loses awareness of the presence, oh, I'm not sharing it, loses awareness and the presence of a child in the back seat of a car. Upon arriving at the destination, the driver exits the car and unknowingly leaves the child in the car. This incomprehensible lapse of memory exposes forgotten children to hazards, including death from heat stroke. More than 400 children in the past 20 years have suffered from heat stroke after being unknowingly forgotten in cars. So, it doesn't sound like a lot, does it? 400 over 20 years. But when you think about it, this is a 100% preventable event. Preventable event. How can a loving and attentive parent or caregiver with no evidence of substance abuse or an organic brain disorder have a catastrophic lapse of memory that places a child's welfare in jeopardy? This article addresses this question at multiple levels of analysis. First, it's concluded that the loss of awareness of a child in a car is a failure of a type of memory referred to as prospective memory. That is, failure to remember to execute a plan in the future. So you're just going along and you just forget. You forget what you got to do next. You know, have you ever gone into a room and you forgot what you're there for? That's a lapse in prospective memory. So if your child, you put your child in the car, you strap them in the car seat in the back and they fall asleep because that's what babies do in cars, right? And you're thinking about the drive. You're thinking about what you're going to do next. You're thinking, once you get home, you're thinking about what you're going to do once you get in the house, and you've completely forgotten your child in the back seat. And this can happen, apparently, in people who are not ill, people who are not on medication, people who don't have dementia. So imagine how much the likelihood of that can increase. Lapse in prospective memory, they're common. We all do it. We've all done it. If you've ever gone into a room and forgotten what you're there for, or opened the fridge door and forgotten what you were going in the fridge for, we've all done it, right? That's a lapse in prospective memory. And in the majority of cases, it's funny. You know, you think, oh, I'm losing my marbles. I've gone here and I have no idea what I'm doing. You know, it's funny. Just occasionally, it can lead to catastrophic outcomes. And leaving a child in a hot car is catastrophic. If you don't remember within the first couple of minutes, it's catastrophic, right, for that child. And it's only children who've gone asleep. Like a child who is awake, you're not going to forget them because they're going to be making noise. Like an older child, you're not going to forget them because they're going to be awake. They're going to be there. They're going to be making noise. They're going to be moving around. You're going to know that they're there. Like we have a problem in this country of people leaving dogs in cars in the summer. Like if you leave a dog in a car in the winter, it's not going to die because it's not warm enough. Even inside the car, it doesn't get warm enough for the dog to die. But then in the summer, you know, because we don't very often have hot days, people forget that when they put the dog in the car, they know the dog's in the car, and they just, the problem with that, the catastrophe there is that they've forgotten how hot cars can be, and dogs die. That's completely different than this situation. This is a lapse in prospective memory because you've literally forgotten your child's there because they're asleep and because you are thinking ahead to the next thing that you're going to be doing, which is driving and then getting home. And even if you have no substances that can impair your memory, even if you've got no neurological issue that can impair your memory, it's still possible that people can do this. But let's consider Tracey Nix. Not only is she an older person who may have been starting to suffer from the effects of dementia, she's also on 3 very powerful drugs, all of which have a sedating effect, all of which reduces your cognitive capacity and increases your potential for having a memory lapse. Okay, so all right, factors that increase the likelihood of prospective memory are identified. 3rd, research on the neurobiology of prospective memory and related memory failures are reviewed, including a discussion on how competition between brain structures contributes to a failure of prospective memory. Finally, the issue of whether a failure of prospective memory that results in harm to a child qualifies as a criminal offence is discussed. Overall, this neuropsychological perspective on how catastrophic memory errors occur should be of value to the scientific community, the public, and law enforcement agencies. So that's just a summary. I don't know if I can even get the full article without paying for it. But anyway, I just thought I'd share that. That's one of his pieces from March 2019, published in Medicine, Science and the Law. All right, let's go back to him here.
So what I do as a part of my research is to monitor the number of children. And the way I do this also is that I'm on task forces that keep track of children that are forgotten and die in cars. I'm on a task force in Florida because of the heat we have in Florida. We have a very high percentage of children that die in hot cars. I'm also on a task force in Texas where they have children, a very high percentage, but actually almost every state in the country, children have died in hot cars. I'm also on an international task force funded by the United Nations because children have died in hot cars all around the world. So we're looking to combat this epidemic of children dying in hot cars.
Have you been published?
So I have an online article in which I have described the neurobiology of what is going on when children are forgotten in cars. And this is a result of the way I do the research. So I personally interview dozens of parents, caretakers, and grandparents that have forgotten children in cars. I read the literature, I read the media reports as to what is going on, as to what is happening when a person is forgotten, when a child is forgotten in cars. So initially, I wrote an online article to explain this, which is an academic online journal called The Conversation. And that article has had over 150,000 views. I then evaluated the
So that's not the article that I've just given you the summary of. The conversation is like it publishes academic research, but it's in a very like I guess layperson kind of viewpoint. It's more of a discussion journal than anything else. But the article that I showed you is an academic journal where there's like results and empirical data and stuff. But anyway, just an aside.
Literature, the neuroscience.
Okay, everyone have a seat. You keep going, but we have a verdict. Your choice. Y'all can.
So they've got a verdict. They've got a verdict, but he does keep going for a little while yet. And then they stop. So I'll let him carry on until they stop him.
Have a seat.
If I can do this after the verdict,
That's entirely up to you.
As I was saying, as a neuroscientist, one who has studied memory all my career, I then evaluated the neurobiology of children being forgotten in cars. And so I published a paper in a hybrid medical legal journal with the help of a law professor.
So that is the paper. That is the paper, this one. So a hybrid medical and legal journal. Medicine, Science and the Law.
Medicine, Science, and the Law. This is a peer-reviewed medical journal in which I described the medical basis of how it is that people can forget children in cars. And this specifically, I want to emphasize, this is for people who are not on medication. I understand that in this case, we have an issue about medication affecting Tracey Nix's memory, and that's certainly valid. But independent of medication, we have hundreds of people who have forgotten children in cars, and that is independent of medication impairing their memory. And this was a part of my publication in Medicine, Science, and the Law.
you indicated you've written some publications. Can you tell us, or do you recall what states you've been a witness in with respect to the issue of children in cars, being left in cars?
Off the top of my head, I've testified as an expert in Texas, Wyoming, Arkansas, and a couple of other states.
Virginia?
And Virginia.
Okay. Have you also consulted with prosecutors regarding this issue?
Yes, I've not only been contacted by defense attorneys, I've been contacted by prosecutors. One in particular, this happened numerous times, so one in particular was a prosecutor in Utah in which a mother forgot a child in the car and the child died. That prosecutor contacted me, telling me that he was considering charging her with a crime, with manslaughter, but he wanted my opinion as to how to go about this. Did I actually consider, well, in his opinion, is this a crime? And we spoke for a good long time. We spoke for about an hour, and I explained to him the neurobiology of this phenomenon. I explained to him, shared all the research that had shown how many hundreds of children had died to really good, attentive, and loving parents, that this is not happening to reckless people. And at the end of our conversation, he decided not to charge her with a crime. And what I was really pleased with was he actually put out a press release, which included his discussion with me as an explanation for why he was not charging her with a crime.
All right, let me go ahead now. We're going to break this. I'm going to
Yes,
check the verdict in. I
Yes,
just got my laptop, which I need to have the verdict come in with. I was just about.
All right, so they break there. They cut him off. They cut him off. I wanted to hear more about the findings of his work. And it's a shame. It's a shame that the court camera was cut off, because hopefully he got to finish his testimony and that's on the record. But it's interesting that a prosecutor in Utah decided not to charge a mother, a good mother, whose child had died in a hot car due to a memory lapse. And that's where the title of this live stream came from. Should this even have been a trial at all? You know, is there any legal punishment that can be put in place to somebody like Tracey Nix, who due to memory lapses or due to falling asleep, has had 2 grandchildren died in her care within a year, Is there any legal punishment that can be put forward that can punish her more than how she's going to punish herself for the rest of her life? Is there any legal punishment that can be worse than that? I absolutely understand. I do. I understand how emotive this subject is because it's a little baby, a little baby girl who is just absolutely adorable. I mean, absolutely just adorable. There's no other words. And then little Ezra also, he looks like a little mischievous monkey. He really does. But is there any punishment that the law can provide that is worse than what Tracey Nix is going to do to herself in the months and years to come? Having 2 grandchildren die in her care. Arguably, I don't think so. I don't think the law can do anything to her worse than what she's going to do to herself. But, I understand that there's an emotional aspect to this, that the parents want to see someone punished for the loss of their children. I understand that. I absolutely understand that. But at the same time, you got to take, with the law, you've got to take emotion out of it. You got to take emotion out of it. And I'm going to potentially argue that what was the prosecutor's point here in even bringing this to court under aggravated manslaughter? To me, it seems that it was overcharged, and it obviously seemed to the jury that it was overcharged. Now, remember, the jury did not hear from the witnesses that we've just heard from. And the jury also, though, on the opposite side, don't know about the death of baby Ezra, because that was considered too prejudicial, because it's not about Ezra. There was no charges in Ezra's case. It's about Uriel. So it's got to focus on Uriel. So I absolutely understand why Ezra wasn't brought up in this trial. But what I can't understand is why the defense weren't allowed to put on those witnesses that were so informative about Tracey, about Tracey's medical issues, and about the potential for children to be left by attentive caregivers in cars due to memory lapses. I don't know. Like I said right at the beginning of this, I honestly do not think there's any winners here. The fact that Tracey was found not guilty of aggravated manslaughter, and then the lesser included charge of just straight manslaughter, yes, the defense consider that a win, but is it really? Is it a win for Tracey? Well, I guess you're going to say, well, she's not going to spend the next 20 years in prison. The maximum sentence she can get from the count that she was found guilty of, leaving a child under the age of 6 in a car unattended for longer than 15 minutes. That's the law. And as the defense attorney said in this piece here, this is William Fletcher, the defense attorney, saying of the jury, they did their job. They did not convict her of the aggravated manslaughter or manslaughter, which was a win. They had no choice on count 2. They had no choice on count 2. I never argued against count 2 because I had nothing to argue. So perhaps the prosecutor should have just focused on count 2. And maybe if they just focused on count 2 and not overcharged, perhaps she would have pled guilty to that. and it wouldn't have meant that the parents and the family members had to sit through a trial. I don't know. I mean, look, my personal opinion is that she was overcharged, that they should never have brought a manslaughter charge against Tracey Nix based on the evidence that these three witnesses who weren't allowed to present their work to the jury had said. And I believe, personally, if they'd have just charged her with the count that she absolutely was guilty of, she absolutely did leave Uriel in a hot car. It caused her grave bodily harm to the point of death, and she was definitely left there for longer than 15 minutes. Absolutely 100% guilty of that. There's no argument against that. If they just charged her with that, perhaps she would have pled guilty and we wouldn't need a trial. And the cost, both, you know, monetary value to the state of Florida, but also to the parents, the family members. There was loads of family members there in the court. They wouldn't have had to sit through a trial. So, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter or manslaughter. I think that's good. I think the jury made the right decision. But they had to find her guilty on count 2. They had to. They had to. All right, let's hear from. So the last thing I'm going to play here. This is only like 6 minutes. This is the parents. So Kayla and Drew, the parents of Uriel, and also Ezra. So I hate to be the person who says that they should take some responsibility for Uriel's death. Not legally. I don't think Kayla did anything legally wrong, but perhaps morally there is some accountability to be had here after Ezra's death, and surely after Tracey being let go from a job due to memory issues, and perhaps they're also aware of the drugs she's on, the medical conditions she's got. Perhaps it was just something that Kayla and the other daughter Rebecca were doing, is letting Tracey babysit, because Tracey wanted to, like, Tracey was a hands-on grandma. She wanted to be a hands-on grandma. But perhaps the parents should have taken heed and said, look, you know, we're not going to ask Tracey to babysit. We're not going to ask mum to babysit, because we don't believe that, you know, her memory is as good as it once was. And she can see her grandkids. She can see her grandkids as often as she wants, but let's have somebody else with her at all times. How about that? Let's have somebody else with her at all times. Like my dad, when he was suffering from dementia, he saw his grandkids. But, well, actually, grandkids were like older. Like, there was no babies in the family. But if there had been babies in the family, would we have let Grandad babysit? No. 100% no. Does it mean that we don't want him to see the grandkids? No. Let him see his grandkids as often as he wants. But let's not leave him in a place of where he's got sole supervision. Let's not do that, because it's putting him in an unfair position, because he's not medically capable of doing that job properly. And also for the safety of the child. Let's not do that. So, I just think that the parents shouldn't have put Tracey and Uriel in that position based on everything else that had happened. I don't think it needed to cause a family rift. I don't think it needed to cause Tracey to not see her grandkids. I think there just needed to be a little bit of thought about Tracey's medical problems, and just to keep everybody safe and everybody, you know, on the same page. Let's make sure that Tracey always has a supervisor when she's looking after the kids. All right, let's listen to what the parents say here.
I was relieved to hear that there was going to be accountability and ownership and a conclusion to this part of this story. One of the things that we have struggled with through this whole case has been the exclusion of my other story, which is my son that drowned in her care. And so for us, this is a win for Yuri. But I have a son named Ezra, and he has not been spoken of. And he died in her care. And I don't have any accountability or any answers for that. And I continue to look for those answers to what happened in that case and why that case was not worthy of prosecution at that time. So we're going to be going back in with the state and having a few more conversations to see. But in this moment, we are relieved. The daughter and me had a very hard time with her being taken, and I ended up stepping aside for that moment. And it isn't something that I would ever call a win for me. It is a win for justice for my daughter. And we are grateful to the jurors that spent their time, to all the experts, to all the police and EMTs, and every person that played a hand in this trial. We are truly grateful for your consideration and your time and the energy you guys have spent, as well as you guys from the media. I'm truly grateful for giving my story a voice and giving our kids a chance for the world to see that they were incredibly wanted and loved and valued to us. I was deeply saddened when my sister had to testify. This trial process has been complicated, but it broke my heart to see her and to have it brought back to memory that there was personal events in their life that day that she had damaged in her world as well. And I adore my son or my nephew, Aiden, and I hate so deeply that he's traumatized by this, including the court process, including all of this, because he's a teenager. And I think that I struggled the most with her testimony, and also just listening to the recording of my mom, I think, go on a long time about where she was going, what was she going to do, and never hearing, oh my God, Yuri, oh my God, my granddaughter, where's my granddaughter, what happened to her?
It was her keeping the information from us instead of telling us. That was,
and we are happy ultimately with what the state provided for us in terms of this case with Ezra, or with Yuri. And I continue to look for a way to address my son Ezra's issue, because it's something I feel worthy of attention.
For it being not guilty, it does sting. I'm thankful though that we did get something. I didn't want to walk out of there and see her walk away like she's been for the past 2 years and just being out and about. I was glad to see that the jury did see our side of it, even though they didn't push for the maximum sentence. It was still, like I said, a form of justice.
Well, and as her daughter, I've struggled the whole time with understanding why there couldn't just be that ownership and what did happen. Like, why did we do this? The destruction that has come from this process is pretty unfathomable as well. You know, my kids are dead, but I've lost a lot more than that.
My son's lost a brother. My son's lost a sister.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? We look at it from that perspective, and it's,
we advocate for our children.
Yeah.
Talking with the assistant state attorney, was there any indication on what she was found guilty on and how much time she would potentially be looking at for a sentence?
He was saying the maximum for the conviction that she had was 5 years. But he was very unsure whether or not they were going to arrest her there.
Go into further details and all of the. It kind of played out in front of us.
But the thing is,
haven't much time to take that in.
The judge knew of my son's story. You know what I mean? The judge was very familiar with it, and I think that had to play in it. Even though the jury didn't know, the judge was very familiar with it. And so
her defense was prepared to shut down a case containing Ezra, which is why they had so many hearings, and ultimately he was excluded from this trial.
We got our son Asher, and we just had a newborn. She is fixing to be 5 months old now, and so we focus on those, and we focus on building. We are always going to be thinking of our children, but I can't neglect my son that I have, and I'm not going to hurt them. It's a day at a time, in a sense.
And when it comes to my family, I mean, that is complicated. In this process, due to certain circumstances, I was already pretty well distanced from them. There are some family members I haven't spoken to in years, and that breaks my heart, and I would want nothing more for that to be different. but the damage has been felt in that way greatly. And I don't know how we recover. I want that. I want us to have a family. But right now it seems very complicated.
Guys and wenches, I really don't want to be that person. I really don't want to be that person who blames the victim, because they are victims. Without a shadow of a doubt, Kayla and Drew are victims. They've lost 2 children in horrific circumstances, and I can understand why they need to blame Tracey. However, after Ezra's death, why would you trust the person who you want charged for Ezra's death, like talking to the prosecutors about what else they can do? Because Ezra's death, little Ezra here, who drowned, that was deemed an accident. But they want her charged with Ezra's death. They wanted Ezra's story to be told at Uriel's trial. Now, there was no charges in Ezra's death, so they can't bring that back and use that in Uriel's trial. So legally, they made the right decision in not allowing the jury to hear about Ezra, because there was no charges in that case. However, there's lots of howevers. There's lots of howevers, because I can see both sides here. You know, as a parent, as a grandparent, I can see both sides here. I really can. But the fact that these parents, you know, the fact that Kayla said, oh, well, they played my mother's interview and she wasn't, what we didn't hear was, where was Uriel and blah, blah, blah. Tracey was inconsolable throughout that entire police recording. Absolutely inconsolable, and did not attempt to make excuses, did not attempt to lie. She was just, I forgot her. I forgot she was there. I forgot she was in the car. How could I? How could I forget? How could I do that? She was questioning herself in this really traumatic state that she was in. And if Kayla and Drew were truly honest with themselves, perhaps it's them that need to take some accountability here. And I didn't like the way that they spoke there. I can understand it from the perspective of, a parent who is just hurting and lashing out and needs to blame someone. But at the end of the day, Kayla left 7-month-old Uriel in Tracey's care, knowing full well that less than a year previous, Tracey had fallen asleep and Ezra died. So if you really felt that Ezra should have, it should have been a criminal case, why would you leave your baby in the care of somebody who you believe was criminally culpable for the death of your previous baby? That does not make sense to me. That doesn't make sense to me. And I can easily see how Kayla would have been quite forceful. You could see it. She rings up. She says, Mother, I've got a hair appointment. Can you take Uriel? And maybe Tracey said something like, I wasn't there. I didn't hear this phone call. I don't know what was said. Just my opinion, speaking freely here to you guys and wenches. Maybe Kayla said, look, I need an afternoon to myself. Can you take Uriel? I've got a hair appointment. And Tracey said, well, I'm out at the moment. I'm going to go out to lunch. And Kayla said, oh, so you won't have her then? And Tracey was like, yeah, I can take her with me. It's not a problem. So Tracey didn't want to say no. She didn't want to rock the boat. She wanted to see Uriel because she's a hands-on grandma who is, a retired school principal. There's no question that Tracey isn't, she's not evil. She's a nice person. She's in her younger years. She was very responsible, had a leadership position. But she was she was having medical issues, and perhaps her family should have appreciated that and not put Tracey in the position that they put her in. There we go. That's what I think. That's what I think. Yeah, after the hair appointment, she went home. Yeah, she went home. So the first she knew about Uriel's death was the cops at her door. So it wasn't like she's, you know, gone for a hair appointment and then gone to pick Uriel up. No, she went home. I mean, look, I don't know. Maybe Uriel was already dead. You know, maybe if Kayla had gone to pick Uriel up straight away, maybe Uriel would still be dead. Maybe she wouldn't be, though. Maybe she wouldn't have been. I mean, how long does a hair appointment take? I'd never go for, I haven't, in my entire adult life, I have never had a hair appointment. It's not something I do. I cut my own hair when I've got split ends. So how long do hair appointments take? I've no idea. Yeah, children take advantage of the free care that grandparents provide, or other family members or friends. You know, it's like, oh, can you do it? Can you do it? Can you do it? And the moment you say no, there's an issue. No, Penguin. No. I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. It was the other daughter, Rebecca, who turned up. She testified. That's why Rebecca had to testify, because she turned up with the grandson because Tracey was doing something with the other grandson from the other sister. So we've got Kayla and Drew, the parents of Ezra and Uriel, and then we've got Rebecca, who is Kayla's sister, who had Aidan, the other grandson. It was Rebecca who turned up with Aidan. And when Rebecca turned up, they were doing CPR on Uriel. So that's why Rebecca testified, basically to say, yeah, they turned up during the CPR. And Aidan witnessed that CPR on his little cousin. So it wasn't Kayla who turned up, it was Rebecca who turned up, because there'd been a pre-arranged agreement for Aidan to do something with grandma. I think go out with grandma. So both sisters were relying or using grandma as free childcare. But grandma wanted to be a hands-on grandma, and she wasn't saying no, even if perhaps she should have done. Perhaps she should have said no. Perhaps she should have said, look, I'm not well enough. I don't feel confident enough. But perhaps she didn't like to say no. She didn't want to say no because she wanted to see her grandkids. So no, Penguin, it was the other sister who turned up. So it's a difficult one. It really is. It's a very interesting one, though. So this is why, you know, I wanted to talk about this case. It's intriguing. It brings up a lot of issues pertaining to where does the law stand in cases where you've got a caregiver who is not diagnosed with dementia, but who perhaps is not in a mind state to really care for a child as needy as a baby. And there's lots of questions that it raises, not just for the law, but for families who are using older members of the family as free childcare. That there needs to be a level of accountability and consideration for elder people. So it's intriguing, very intriguing. I'm interested in the psychology of this. I'm interested in the legal implications of this for other cases. So, yeah, there you go. That's the case of Tracey Nix. Very, very sad. There's no winners in this case. No winners. Even though Tracey was found not guilty of manslaughter and the defense attorney, considers it a win, I don't think it's a win. I think it's a positive outcome that the jury, I think, made the right decision. But there is no punishment that, on Tracey's sentencing on April the 3rd, there's no punishment that judge can give that is worse than how Tracey is going to live the rest of her life. And unfortunately, her own family put her in that position. It's incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. All right, guys, I'm going to go. And I'm just going to have a look to see if there's any updates in Eliza and Henrietta's case. No. Last update was 6 hours ago. So no, Eliza and Henrietta still haven't been found. They're the missing sisters in Aberdeen in Scotland. But if there are any updates later today in Eliza and Henrietta's case, I will bring those to you, either in a video on Michelle Walks, or if they find them, then I'll go live. But other than that, thank you for joining me. Thank you for the person that donated earlier on in the live stream. Thanks, as always, to the mods. And, yeah, continue the discussion in the comments. I don't think there's a right or wrong on this, honestly. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think there's implications for potentially everybody here. So, all right, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll speak to you very soon. Bye, guys.